Despite advancements in ICT, South Africa still struggles with a broadband quality compared to other countries. And this, of course, highlights the need for further improvements to match leading global markets. And this was revealed by the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa. That's ICASA's State of the ICT report that was released last month. Now, it also indicated that over the past 5 years, there has been a decline in paying TV subscriptions. And this is attributed to increasing competition from digital streaming platforms. And recently, ICASA also presented its annual report for the 2023-2024 financial year in Parliament. And to help us unpack some of these issues pertaining to ICASA's performance, we joined here in studio this morning by Mr. Mothibi Ramusi, who is the ICASA Chairperson. Thanks so much for your time, Mr. Ramusi, and welcome to Morning Live.
Thanks, Sakina. Good morning. And to the viewers here. Thank you.
There are so many issues to discuss right now, but perhaps from your perspective as ICASA, having presented your annual report to Parliament, what are the more salient issues that you believe you need to appraise the public of?
Yeah, thanks, Akina. I think from our side, firstly, let me acknowledge the whole ICT sector to have played their part in our democratic journey, because as you know, we're an institution that supports democracy as ICASA. So when you have licensees that are making sure that communities are connected from a telecommunication, broadcasting and postal, that makes us as a regulator happy to know and actually appreciate that they understand our mandate as well. Yeah, I think those are the issues. Yeah.
So in that report to Parliament, you didn't meet all your annual targets that were set out. But having said that, let's speak to some of the reasons and also what you believe ICASA should and will prioritize going forward.
Yeah, having said so, having said earlier on that as a regulator, one of our main strive is to make sure that we regulate in the public interest. And as an authority, there are 3 sectors that we regulate: telecommunication, broadcasting, and postal sectors. Now, you'll recall that a couple of years ago, say about 6-7 years, the main global agenda has been about digital transformation. Now, if you look at that whole concept, as an authority, one of our immediate action was to make sure that we facilitate the whole transformation into a digitally enabled environment. And how do we do that? We do, a part of our work is to avail spectrum. Now, spectrum, it's your natural resource, which is the air. Now, with spectrum, we are now enabling all those that have got an appetite to provide services in various sectors, not just in telecommunication, maritime, aviation, broadcast, and even in the two-way radio industry. Now, by providing that platform framework, it enables those that are supposed then to provide services to make sure that we advance South Africa to be a digitally enabled economy, because we know amongst other vertical sectors, we've got the fintech, which relies on infrastructure. So the main strive for us has always been to make sure that we facilitate, enable, and make sure that there's proper infrastructure, broadband that is available to all South Africans, not only for urban, but including rural. Now,
and speaking of broadband, if I may just interject here, Mr. Ramusi, in your State of the ICT report, you indicated that there's a notable 7.46% increase in mobile cellular subscriptions from 2024. And looking at that, how would you rate our network connectivity? Because, speaking of broadband, the quality is something that many consumers have brought into question over the years.
Yeah, I must say, Sakina, the truth be told, we have made some very good strides in this country. As a regulator, we've made sure that our licensees comply to their terms and conditions. But there are areas that we have taken note that in the past years, there has been a little bit of degradation in terms of network quality. And there are various elements that causes that. We know that, post-COVID, our licensees have brought some of their challenges to the authority. This relates to vandalism, where you find that because you need to have alternative power, the solar, the batteries, we are being told, and we've seen it as well, that there's a little bit of vandalism happening out there. But as a solution, having seen that, we've always said to our licensees, all of them, that it's going to be important that as and when you build a network, when you get into a community like in my village in Botokwa, you don't just walk in and put a base station. You need to engage. So stakeholder engagement is going to be key to minimize some of the risks that we are seeing. Because if we are talking about accelerating of broadband, it requires in some instances rapid deployment, which will require municipalities to come on board. Because I must say that we've been having challenges in this country when it comes to coordination. So one of the main strive for the next 5 years is to strengthen our relationships with SALGA, municipalities, the civil aviation, because for those who are building networks, our SMMEs, you need permits just to dig the road. Now, if a permit takes you more than a year or two, you can imagine, Sakina, that all the NDP objectives that says by 2030, all South Africans should have access to broadband, we will be challenged.
So why is it taking that long?
Well, it's a combination of things. From a regulatory point of view, we've got policies that requires a revamp. In the past 25 years, in our sector, we've been obviously engaging with the ministry, realizing that based on all the emerging trends, emerging technologies, our current legislation, the Electronic Communication Act, it's still talking about old stuff. Now, things have changed. We need to adapt. We're in an agile environment. And as an authority, there are a lot of things that we want to see South Africans enjoying so that we become part of the global world. But the limitations right now is we still have legislative framework that is not talking to the current and the future. So just to answer your question, really, in terms of the growth, I must say, in the past 5 years, there's been growth, especially in the subscriber base, in the telcos. In the broadcasting, we've made some very good stride. 20 years ago, we never had broadcasting for communities in villages. So today, I see, and I'm very proud as an authority to see how our communities are using their local broadcasting services to talk about their local issues, and you're unearthing talent for broadcasters, presenters like yourself. In the post office, I must say, we've seen some challenges. Hence, earlier on when I talk about policy reform.
It's beyond challenges in the post office at this point.
Well, Sakina, in business, you need to stay abreast with technology changes. Now, what has happened, we know, if you're in the postal sector, let me put it in general, technology has actually shown us that the future is about your e-commerce. People want to get into on an online platform so that it's easy, it's efficient. And I must say, perhaps maybe with our post office, overtaken by events. And this, what it means, it calls for those that are going to be appointed as boards. Make sure that you support your technology strategy. Because what we're beginning to see as an authority, sometimes people blame us as an authority that there's no development, only to find that some of the state-owned entities, the way decisions are taken, ICT is not being put at the top level when you discuss. So as an authority, the inputs that we always say to our licensees, make sure that you bring your technology advisors, your technology directors in your executive council. You cannot have your CIOs at a very low level because things around development, especially on the impact and how technology can enable your business, they never get discussed at that level. So those are some of the parallel advisory that we give to our licensee because, as I said, as a regulator, we want to see this country striving. From an economy point of view, we need to be competing with the best of the world, in the world.
So it brings us to where we are right now, the SABC. Yeah. You mentioned a few things. You spoke about public participation, and you mentioned instances where perhaps our legislation may be outdated. So if we take the SABC, for example, and where we find ourselves currently, looking at the funding model for the SABC, and this is, of course, what would enable the SABC to generate revenue in the main. Looking at where we find ourselves and the regulations vis-a-vis the opportunities to generate revenue in a more meaningful way, what is ICASA's stance on this particular matter?
Yeah, I think, Sakina, because I don't want to single out you as the only licensee. I think it's fair for me to say in the broadcasting field, as we look at it now, we need to acknowledge that there are a number of new inventions that are coming. Right now, you've got your over-the-top, which now people are providing content online. Now, what we need to do, the posture that an institution like SABC needs to take is the impact of OTT. How must we then react to these emerging trends? Because the truth be told, it is happening. Now, from an authority point of view, we have been engaging, obviously, with our Department of Communication and Digital Technologies. And the good thing as a country, having realized that there's a need to proactively identify these new emerging trends, what must we do? We've got an audio and audiovisual content service policy framework. Now, if you look at what the framework ought to do, the framework is saying we recognize that the likes of OTT, the likes of podcast are here with us. Now, what must we then do from a policy point of view? As a regulator, what's going to be important, Sakina, is as and when you issue a policy, you need to have clear defined definitions of what OTT means, what podcast means, because I wouldn't want to regulate an industry that is full of ambiguity. It's very important that the language we use, I know that legal people will come, but I need to have a document that is easy to implement. And in this case, for SABC and other broadcasters, it calls for you then to take one step back and then say, given now that they're this all emerging, what kind of collaborations do we need?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
That being said, though, if you look at the law, the regulations governing the SABC, let me ask a direct question. Is the SABC funding model still viable?
Well, given the current state all over the world, I think there's a need now, and there was a need to review. I think I wouldn't want to regulate an industry of licenses that are there to fail. We don't license operators or any person to fail. So as an independent person, as I said initially, I would urge that anyone that sees that there are some emerging trends that are currently affecting your bottom line, it becomes important for your shareholders to take a different posture and say, to what extent can you now not influence, but contribute to policy changes? Because as a regulator, I will obviously be engaging with yourselves through our process because we're very independent. We do our work in a very transparent manner. So the likes of broadcasters, because of your OTTs, we need them to say, if I'm paying license fees, I'm paying service fees, anyone that comes into our space, what kind of a policy framework do we need to make sure that there's a balance? Because you're providing services, and if somebody provides services on a platform, but they are not paying tax, they're not paying services, I'm sure in a democratic country like South Africa, we need to reflect and say, how do we balance this?
And I would say it's long overdue, because given the public service mandate that the SABC has to comply with, you know, and looking at how it's meant to fund that particular work, it's really a conversation and, you know, a regulation shift that's long overdue. But we're out of time. I quickly want to ask you about ICASA and Starlink and that licensing issue. And of course, it's a broader issue, but just in the interest of time, your view on that very briefly.
Yeah, Sakin, I think you asked about the question of our next 5 years. So amongst other things, obviously, is to promote competition in the country, making sure that the communities are literate when it comes to digital services and knowledge, and most importantly, compliance, because, you know, people that we issue licenses, they must make sure that the quality of service, the cost that they offer to our citizens are reasonable and affordable. Now, with satellite, as I've indicated, NDP 2030, we need to make sure that we fast-track, as an authority, facilitate infrastructure rollout. Satellite, like many other platforms, whether it's your infrastructure in fiber or it's wireless, satellite is one of those transmission medium that you can accelerate connectivity. It doesn't come cheap, but I'm glad that our country has seen it fit that there's a need for us to look at a national space program. Now, as an authority, we will be embracing any technology because we're a technology neutral regulator. So I'm not going to mention the name, but I'm saying there's what you call low Earth orbiting satellites. There are a number of operators all over the world. In this country, we welcome anyone that complies to our regulatory framework, which means a license, an invitation to apply will be issued. There are requirements. You need to comply to those requirements. Amongst them, it includes ownership and controls. And as we said, we need to make sure that our SMME, women, youth, people with disability are part of the value chain. So if you are going to be a licensee in our environment, bring those elements as part of your ownership so that we can grow the economy of this country. And it must be based on an inclusive model. And that's what the regulator is fostering, to make sure that we're not just a regulator on paper, but we make an impact in this country.
Well, still so much, but we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. Mothibi Ramusi, ICASA Chairperson, talking to us about a variety of issues. ICASA's mandate, performance after presenting the Independent Communication Authority's 2023-24 annual report to Parliament recently.